Everything you are looking at right now, the room you're in, the device you're listening on, the light coming through your window is basically a hallucination.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, yes, your eyes are open, obviously, but if you think of your eyes like a pair of, biological video cameras that just feed an objective reality into your head, you're really only about half right.
Exactly, just half. The other half is this bizarre, completely mind-bending construction project happening entirely inside the pitch-black space of your skull.
Right. So, welcome to today's deep dive. We've got a massive stack of anatomy and physiology notes in front of us covering the eye and vision, and our mission today is pretty ambitious.
Very ambitious.
We are going to follow a single photon of light from the outside world right through the wet biological machinery of your eye and all the way into your brain to answer one ultimate question: how do you actually see?
And it's a journey that completely redefines the concept of reality, honestly. Because
Hmm.
when physiologists look at this process, they actually break it into two entirely separate linked halves.
Right, the camera part and the computer part.
Exactly. First, you have the optics. That is the camera part gathering, bending, and focusing physical light.
Right.
But the second half is transduction and processing. And that is where physical light is converted into a neural code and, well, actively reconstructed into perception.
And the sources highlight a clinical reality that proves just how separate those two halves really are, cortical blindness.
Yeah, it's a fascinating and really tragic condition. A person can have a perfectly healthy eye,
Yeah.
a pristine cornea, a flawless lens, fully functioning retinas, but if the visual cortex at the back of their brain is damaged by a stroke or trauma, they are functionally blind.
The camera works flawlessly, but the computer is unplugged.
Right. And the reverse is also true. You can have severely damaged, non-functioning eyes, but an intact visual cortex might misfire and generate phantom visual sensations. So the modern consensus is that the eye is just a transducer. Seeing is an action performed entirely by the brain.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to fully appreciate how revolutionary that idea is, we have to recognize that for most of human history, the greatest minds on Earth believed vision worked in the exact opposite direction.
They did. I mean, if you asked ancient Greek thinkers like Euclid or Ptolemy or the really influential Roman physician Galen how vision worked, they all subscribed to extramission theory.
Meaning, like, emitting outward, like the eyes were flashlights.
More like physical tentacles, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they believed the eye actively emitted these invisible visual rays that traveled out into the world to literally touch objects. You saw a tree because your eye reached out and felt it with light.
Which sounds completely wild to a modern listener, but I mean, it completely survives in our everyday language. Think about it. We constantly say things like, I'm shooting a look at someone, or casting a glance across the room.
Or having piercing eyes.
Exactly. We still casually speak as if vision is a physical action we project out onto the world.
And that active projector model dominated human thought for almost 1,500 years. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the pivot away from this came from the Arab polymath Ibn al-Haytham.
Also known in the West as Alhazen, right?
Right. He was working in Cairo around the year 1011, and he started applying basic logical friction to this theory. He asked a very simple question. If my eyes are the things emitting the rays, why does it physically hurt to stare at the sun?
It's such a brilliant, obvious point. If I'm the one reaching out to touch the sun with my visual tentacles, my eye shouldn't be the thing getting burned. The sun should just feel hot to the touch.
Exactly. The pain implies incoming energy. And Alhazen didn't just stop at logic, He used camera obscuras and controlled light sources to track how light moves through apertures.
Right.
And in his massive 7-volume book of optics, he definitively proved intromission theory, the reality that light travels from objects into the passive eye. By introducing rigorous experimental methods to vision, he basically became the undisputed father of modern optics.
But proving light goes in is one thing, right? Figuring out how a wet sphere of jelly turns that light into an image took a few more centuries. Like in 1604, the astronomer Johannes Kepler finally did the math.
He did. He calculated that the lens of the eye must focus light rays to form an inverted upside-down image on the back wall of the eye.
But math is just numbers on a page. He never actually saw it happen.
No, he didn't. The visceral, empirical proof of Kepler's math came from the philosopher René Descartes in 1637, and he took a very hands-on, slightly gruesome approach.
He went to a slaughterhouse, right?
Yeah, he took the freshly severed eye of an ox. He surgically scraped away the thick, opaque outer layers at the very back of the eyeball, the sclera, until the tissue was translucent.
No.
I know, it's intense.
Yeah.
Then he held this raw, disembodied ox eye up to a window in a dark room. And right there, shining through the back tissue of the retina, he watched a tiny, upside-down, full-color image of the courtyard outside appear.
It was the first physical proof that the retina operates as a projection screen. It's just an incredible image to imagine. So that historical pivot establishes the eye as a passive receiver. But let's follow our photon of light into the actual biological camera to see how that upside-down image is formed.
Right, let's track it.
So the photon screams toward your face, and the very first thing it hits is the cornea, the clear dome at the front of the eye. And reading the sources, this was a massive paradigm shift for me. I always assumed the lens sitting deeper in the eye did all the focusing work.
It is a very common assumption. But the cornea is actually the heavy lifter here. It provides roughly 2/3 of the eye's total refractive or focusing power. We measure optical power in diopters, and the cornea handles about 40 to 43 diopters of focusing.
While the internal lens only manages about 15 to 20.
Right, exactly.
Wait, I need to stop you there. I see the word diopter printed on my contact lens boxes all the time, but I have no idea what it actually represents in physical space. What is a diopter?
Oh, it's simply a measurement of how sharply a lens bends light. Specifically, it's the reciprocal of the focal length in meters. So a 1-diopter lens will take parallel rays of light and focus them to a sharp point exactly 1 meter away.
Okay, so if a 1-diopter lens focuses light at 1 meter, a 40-diopter cornea is bending the light 40 times more sharply, meaning it focuses the light at 140th of a meter, which is 2.5 centimeters.
Which happens to be the exact average length of human eyeball.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the cornea's steep curve is mathematically perfect for throwing a focused image precisely onto the back wall of your eye.
That is incredible, and it completely reframes how I think about LASIK surgery. When someone gets a laser to fix their vision, the laser never even touches the lens.
Nope, not at all.
It's just reshaping that front windshield, the cornea, because changing the curve of the cornea by just a fraction of a millimeter fundamentally alters where the light converges.
Spot on. So once the light makes it through that highly engineered cornea, it hits the aperture of our biological camera, the pupil and the iris. The iris is the colored muscle, and the pupil is the empty black hole in the middle, letting the light through.
And the pupil is constantly adjusting via the pupillary light reflex. In extremely bright light, it shrinks down to a pinhole about 2 millimeters across. In pitch darkness, it widens to about 8 millimeters.
Which might not sound like a dramatic shift, but remember, you are dealing with the area of a circle. Going from a 2-millimeter diameter to an 8-millimeter diameter is a 16-fold increase in the actual physical area letting light into the eye.
So the volume of light is set. Now it passes through the pupil and finally hits the crystalline lens. And if the cornea did the heavy lifting for distance, the lens is our fine-tuning dial, right?
Exactly. It allows us to shift focus from a distant mountain to a book in our hands. It's a process called accommodation, which was described brilliantly by Hermann von Helmholtz.
The mechanical engineering of accommodation is fascinating. The lens is suspended in the middle of the eye by these tiny thread-like fibers called zonules.
Right. And these fibers are attached to a ring-shaped muscle called the ciliary muscle, and the mechanism operates completely counterintuitively.
Right. I had to read this section 3 times to make sure I understood it. Usually, when a muscle contracts, things get pulled tight. But here, when you want to look at something close up, like a computer screen, that ring-shaped ciliary muscle contracts like a sphincter. It tightens into a smaller circle.
And by shrinking the circle, it actually introduces slack into those tiny suspensory fibers. The tension releases.
And because the lens is naturally elastic, like a rubber ball, when the fibers go slack, it naturally bulges out. It rounds up, becoming thicker, which increases its focusing power for close-up objects.
Precisely. But here's the biological tragedy, unfortunately. As we age, the structural proteins in that lens degrade and cross-link. The lens gets physically stiffer. It loses that youthful, rubbery elasticity.
Wait, is that why my parents, right around their mid-40s, suddenly started holding restaurant menus at arm's length, squinting under the dim lighting?
Yes, that is the dreaded presbyopia. Even when their ciliary muscle contracts perfectly and the fibers go completely slack, the lens is just too stiff to round up and bulge. Near objects become permanently blurry because the eye has lost its fine-tuning mechanism. It is why almost every human being eventually requires reading glasses.
Okay, so the cornea aggressively bent the light, the iris adjusted the volume, and the flexible lens fine-tuned the focus. We now have a perfectly sharp, upside-down image hitting the back wall of the eye, the retina.
Right.
But here is the major evolutionary hurdle. The brain sitting in the dark skull doesn't speak light. It only understands electrical impulses. The physical photon has to be translated.
And this brings us to the retina, which is arguably one of the most miraculous transducers in nature. A transducer simply turns one form of energy into another. The retina contains two main classes of photoreceptor cells. You have roughly 120 million rods and about 6 million cones.
Cones give us our high-definition, full-color world, but they're kind of greedy. They require a ton of bright light to wake up and function. Rods are the dim light specialists. They are hypersensitive, but they are totally colorblind.
Right. And to understand how they actually catch light, we have to look at the molecular level. Inside those rods is a pigment called rhodopsin. Rhodopsin is built from a protein called opsin, bonded to a tiny molecule derived from vitamin A called retinol. When our traveling photon of light finally strikes that retinal molecule, the physical shape of the molecule snaps. It bends.
And this shape change triggers the phototransduction cascade. But the sources point out something incredibly strange about how this actually generates electricity. I assumed light turned the cell on, but it's the opposite.
It is the opposite. In pitch darkness, your photoreceptor cells are actually constantly active. They have open ion channels, continuously leaking positive sodium ions into the cell, keeping the voltage relatively high, and constantly releasing neurotransmitters.
What?
Yeah, so when that photon hits the rhodopsin and changes its shape, it triggers a chemical chain reaction that violently slams those ion channels shut.
So the positive charge stops leaking in and the internal voltage of the cell suddenly plummets. That sudden negative voltage drop is the biological alarm bell telling the brain, I saw light.
Exactly. Light turns the active cell off, and that silence is the signal. And the sheer sensitivity of this cascade is terrifying. There was a landmark experiment in 1942 by Hecht, Schleyer, and Pirenne. Using incredibly precise optics and dark-adapted subjects, they proved that a single solitary photon is enough to trigger this cascade in a human rod cell.
One fundamental particle of the universe.
That's one.
It acts like a microscopic amplifying domino effect. You knock over this one atomic scale domino with a photon, and the biochemical chain reaction amplifies it enough to alter the voltage of the entire cell.
It might be the most sensitive biological sensor known to science. But because we rely on those ultra-sensitive rods in the dark, it dictates our nocturnal reality. If you stand outside under a full moon, the landscape looks entirely gray and colorless. Moonlight is simply sunlight reflected off a dark rock. It isn't bright enough to activate your 6 million cones.
Oh, man.
Yeah, your color vision completely shuts down, leaving you entirely dependent on your 120 million colorblind rods.
You literally become temporarily colorblind every time you navigate a dark room. Okay, the electrical signal is generated, but raw data is not a picture. The signal has to leave the eye and head into the brain's construction site. And here's where it gets really interesting, because the hardware of the eye has physical flaws, and the brain has to cover them up.
The most famous hardware flaw is the blind spot. All those electrical signals generated by the rods and cones get passed to ganglion cells. Think of these ganglion cells as the outgoing wires. They all bundle together to form the optic nerve.
So it's not like a wireless transmission. It's like a massive bundle of physical sensor wires leaving the back of a digital camera, and those wires have to take up actual physical real estate on the sensor board to exit.
That's a perfect analogy. About 1.2 million of these physical wires per eye converge at one exit point on the retina called the optic disc. Because all the space there is taken up by the exiting cables, there is no room for any photoreceptors.
Zero rods, zero cones, a literal gaping hole in your visual field.
And you can actually prove this right now. If you're not driving, stretch your arms straight out in front of you and give a thumbs up with both hands. Close your left eye and stare directly at your left thumb with your open right eye. Now, slowly move your right thumb out to the right side.
Okay, doing it.
Keep staring at the left thumb. At a certain point, about 15 degrees out, your right thumb will completely vanish into thin air.
It just pops out of existence.
Yep. And the French physicist Edmé Mariotte discovered this in the 1660s. He used to amuse King Louis XIV's court with a parlor trick where he would walk a target across the room until it perfectly hit a courtier's blind spot, making it disappear.
But the wild part isn't that we have a blind spot, it's that we never notice it unless we do that thumb trick.
Because your visual cortex refuses to give you a black hole.
Yeah.
It actively looks at the surrounding colors and patterns, the wallpaper, the sky, and simply photoshops the gap in real time. It actively invents missing information to keep your reality seamless.
And it doesn't just Photoshop out the gaps, it physically flips the entire world upright. Descartes proved the image on the retina is upside down and mirrored left to right. The brain receives inverted data and has to learn how to flip it.
We know it's a learned behavior because of a brilliant, highly nauseating experiment in 1896 by a psychologist named George Stratton. He wanted to see how far the brain's construction software could be pushed, so he wore special prism goggles that artificially flipped his vision completely upside down.
So his poor brain was getting an upright image on the physical retina, which its software then incorrectly flipped upside down in his perception. The ceiling was the floor.
Exactly. And for the first few days, he was completely debilitated. Reaching for objects was impossible. Walking was terrifying. But the brain is incredibly plastic. After about a week of wearing the goggles continuously, his brain simply rewrote the spatial map.
Wow.
The world started looking normal and upright again, even while wearing the inverting goggles.
The brain just shrugged, realized the math was wrong, and updated the software, which perfectly explains why scientists spent centuries aggressively debating how we process color. In the 1800s, you had this massive fight. Thomas Young and Hermann von Helmholtz argued for trichromatic theory. They said all color perception comes from mixing three base signals, red, green, and blue.
But another scientist, Ewald Hering, strongly pushed back with the opponent process theory. He pointed out that trichromatic theory doesn't explain the actual human experience of color. We can easily imagine a yellowish red, as we call it orange, but try to imagine a reddish green or a yellowish blue. You can't. The colors cancel each other out in our minds. So Hering argued that color is processed in paired, opposing channels. Red battles green, blue battles yellow.
And the punchline to this bitter, centuries-old scientific debate, they were both 100% right.
They were, just at different stages of the visual pipeline. The cones in the retina are trichromatic. They gather raw red, green, and blue light data. But before that data even leaves the eye, the ganglion cells recode those raw signals into Hering's opponent channels. It's a textbook case of two rival theories describing different levels of the exact same system.
And that tension between physical light and perceptual construction echoes an even older debate. Isaac Newton used glass prisms to prove that color is a physical, measurable property of light wavelengths. But the poet Goethe wrote an entire book in 1810 insisting that color is a subjective, psychological experience shaped by our biology and the contrast of shadows around us.
And again, modern neuroscience sides with both. The wavelength of a photon is physical physics, but the color you see is a psychological construction.
Which perfectly explains the greatest internet debate of our time, the dress from 2015. Some people saw it as black and blue, others saw it as white and gold. The physical wavelengths hitting everyone's retinas through their phone screens were identical, but people's brains made different subconscious assumptions about the ambient lighting in the photo.
Right, context matters.
If your brain assumed the dress was in a shadow, it actively subtracted blue light from the image, leaving you with white and gold. Your brain literally overrides the physical reality of the photons to invent a color that makes sense to its internal logic.
It's called color constancy. And when a system relies this heavily on software construction, slight genetic variations lead to wildly divergent human realities, which is why we have so many cultural misunderstandings about our eyes.
Right, like color blindness. When I was a kid, I thought colorblind people just saw the world in black and white movie tones. But true, total colorblindness, achromatopsia, is incredibly rare.
Very rare. When someone is diagnosed as colorblind, they almost always have a red-green deficiency. And it affects about 8% of men of Northern European descent, compared to only about 0.5% of women.
Because of the X chromosome, right?
Exactly. The genes controlling the red and green cone pigments are located on the X chromosome. John Dalton, the famous chemist, first described it in himself in 1794, which is why it's still sometimes called Daltonism. They don't lack color, they just have an overlap in the sensitivities of their red and green cones, making certain hues mathematically indistinguishable to the brain.
It's fascinating how biology varies. Speaking of which, the sources absolutely destroyed a myth I learned in middle school biology that eye color is a simple genetic coin flip, where brown is a dominant trait and blue is recessive. Completely false. It's polygenic. Up to 16 different genes interact to determine the exact amount and distribution of melanin pigment in the front layers of your iris.
Biology is rarely as simple as a Punnett square. And we also have to clear up perhaps the most pervasive dietary myth in history: carrots and night vision.
Yes. So you're telling me my parents yelling at me to eat my carrots so I could see in the dark was basically just recycled World War II Allied propaganda?
I'm afraid so. During WWII, British Royal Air Force pilots were suddenly incredibly successful at shooting down German bombers in the pitch black of night. To cover their tracks, the British Air Ministry circulated newspaper stories claiming their pilots, like the famous John Cat's Eyes Cunningham, were just eating massive amounts of carrots, boosting their night vision.
When in reality,
In reality, the British had secretly invented airborne interception radar. They were tracking the German planes electronically. The carrot story was a brilliant piece of counterintelligence to keep the Germans from realizing radar technology had been miniaturized enough to fit inside a fighter plane.
I mean, vitamin A is the core building block of retinal, which is required for the rods to function, right?
Correct. If you are starving and severely vitamin A deficient, eating a carrot will restore your vision to baseline. But if you have a normal, healthy diet, eating a mountain of carrots will not supercharge your rhodopsin and give you superhero night vision.
But the stakes of understanding this biology go way beyond debunking old war myths. We are talking about massive global public health innovations. We mentioned the lens gets stiff as we age, but it can also become cloudy.
Yes, those are cataracts, and they remain the leading cause of blindness worldwide. The modern solution is to surgically remove the cloudy lens and insert a clear artificial one, and the origin of that specific surgery is one of the greatest accidental discoveries in medicine.
This blew my mind. The British ophthalmologist Harold Ridley invented the artificial intraocular lens in 1949, and he got the idea from treating injured World War II fighter pilots.
He did. He noticed that pilots who had suffered cockpit canopy shattering had tiny shards of acrylic plastic lodged deep inside their eyes. But unlike glass or metal, their immune systems weren't attacking or rejecting the plastic. It was completely inert.
That's wild.
He realized he could use that exact same acrylic material to replace a clouded human lens. Today, cataract surgery is one of the most common and successful procedures in the world.
Incredible.
This raises an important question, though. We can surgically fix a cloudy lens, but what about the physical shape of the eye itself? Because the sources point out a genuine, documented crisis happening right now, the global myopia epidemic.
The numbers in the notes are staggering. Nearsightedness is skyrocketing. In some East Asian urban centers, like Seoul and Singapore, studies show that 80 to 90% of young adults are now myopic.
80 to 90%. That is far too rapid to be a genetic shift. Human genetics do not evolve in a single generation.
So it has to be environmental.
Exactly. Researchers strongly link this massive spike to how modern childhoods have fundamentally changed. Specifically, children are spending dramatically less time outdoors in natural sunlight, combined with intense, prolonged periods of near work, like staring at books, tablets, and phones.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, the lack of bright outdoor light, which stimulates dopamine release in the retina to regulate eye growth, combined with constant near focusing, physically causes the eyeball to elongate.
The biology is literally reacting in real time to the environment. The eyeball grows too long, meaning the cornea focuses the image slightly in front of the retina instead of directly on it, causing distance blur. It proves how dynamic and reactive this system truly is. So, what does this all mean?
Well, it's quite a journey.
We started with a single photon bouncing off an object in the world. It gets aggressively bent by the clear dome of the cornea. It sneaks through the adjustable aperture of the pupil, gets fine-tuned by a flexible lens, and crashes into a molecule of rhodopsin. That impact slams shut an ion channel, triggering a voltage drop that screams to the brain in electrical code. And then the brain takes that upside-down, color-separated hole-punch data and actively photoshops it into the seamless, beautiful reality you are experiencing right now.
It is a continuous real-time illusion. And to leave you with one final thought on just how much of an illusion it really is, we have to talk about saccadic masking.
Oh, this is the absolute perfect way to end.
Your eyes do not glide smoothly across a room when you scan it. The muscles physically cannot do that. Instead, your eyes dart aggressively from point to point, making 2 to 3 rapid jumps, or saccades, every single second.
But the world doesn't look like a shaky cam action movie to us.
Because of saccadic masking. During those rapid jumps, the sheer blur of motion sweeping across your retina would be incredibly nauseating and disorienting. So to protect you, your brain literally shuts off your visual processing during the jump. Your vision is suppressed.
Wait, so if my eyes are jumping 3 times a second and my brain cuts the feed every single time they jump?
It means that if you look around the room right now, you are actually completely legally blind for up to 45 minutes of every waking day. You spend a massive portion of your life not seeing anything at all, but your brain seamlessly stitches the static frames together editing out the blackouts in real time to give you the comforting illusion of a continuous reality.
The camera is an illusion. The construction project is everything. Look around your room right now and try to catch your brain in the act of editing out a jump. You won't be able to. The software is just too good.